Hello, welcome back. We are in 2.4 in our unit of indigenous resistance um, and colonialism. So we're in the past unit lesson we were discussing about the mission system life, and you used sources to interpret that. Today we're going to focus on the California dehumanization, uh, and you will be looking at different parts of history um, that happened. If you visited the mission system, they told us a complete different story, which is the master narrative that the mission system life was amazing and that it was they the missions gave life to these people. But we should always question history. So if you haven't visited the mission yet, I really hope you're taking this information and you're starting to you know see this history through a different lens. So when you attend this mission, ask the questions, and I think it's important that we ask, right? Okay, so moving forward. So right about now, you should have finished your, well, not right about now, but you should have finished your do now. And now we're going to take some notes. So you're going to visit your modules and you're going to go on to 2.4. 2.4 case studies. And it's going to look like this, a handout. You're going to have some vocabulary, the focal periods, that's what you're going to take notes on. And I have the links of the slides. That way you don't get lost. And you can, do this, take your time as you're taking this. There's no rush. And then the focal period 3 with the slides embedded. And then, of course, you have to do a reflection because we have all these sources, but what are we going to do with it? How do we make this? How do we process this, right? Okay, so let's move on. So the question we're exploring is, how have indigenous people been historically dehumanized by colonialism in America? I'm sorry, in California, but also in America. Uh, how have they been treated less than human? How did they experience terror, right? How did they experience the act of like being forced to change if they had to, or, you know, that's questions that I have. And they probably have too. Okay, I'm just blabbing on. Doesn't matter. Anyway, so let's focus. So our focal periods we discuss is the mission system in California, and now we're going to be talking about the boarding schools. And the boarding schools, I think, um, are quite surprising, because these boarding schools, they were forced to go to school. Not like it wasn't like our schools now, or are they? I don't know. Make you think, but they were forced. They were forced to attend. So your handouts are going to look like this. I already showed you. So here are the definitions. We have dehumanization. In yellow are vocabulary words. As I'm reading these off, when you're writing your definition, make these that you understand them. Write these for yourself. Sometimes if you copy down definitions that, so like if you don't understand it, you're not going to know the word, right? So dehumanization is a process of denying people their humanity, people being seen as less than human. So basically, if you treat someone with such indecency and you don't see them as human, then that's a dehumanization. For example, if your boss yells at you at work in front of their entire coworkers and they embarrassed you, boom, that's dehumanization. It can happen at school, it can happen at home, it can happen out in public, right? That's what it is. Second word is assimilation. Is a process in which a minority group or culture comes to resemble a dominant group or assume the values, behaviors, and beliefs of the dominant group. So it is when a person drops their own values and beliefs and morals, to fit in and survive. Some see it as a survival tool because in order to survive, we have to fit in. But others see it as like you have to force yourself to assimilate. Like, that's the question. Like, why do we have to assimilate? Why do we have to lose things about ourselves? And that's the question that, people are asking to this day, right? So, for example, consider your cultural practices or tradition groups of people that might lose as they assimilate. For example, my parents, they're both from Mexico. They came here around 18, 16 or 18 years old. When they came here, they were fresh from Mexico, so they had a very strong traditions from Mexico. For example, one thing is Day of the Dead. They no longer practice it. So when I visited Mexico one time, I remember seeing an altar and I was like, whoa, like, how come we don't have this at home? And it's because my parents had to drop those cultural practices or traditions in order to, fit into this dominant group, which is the US, American, right? What is this idea of being an American? Um, they did it to survive. Um, right? So one practice that my mom may have picked up from living here is, making a dinner for Thanksgiving. And the reason why she did it was because she learned how to cook it. And so, um, we have we've had Thanksgiving dinner and she picked it up without her really knowing the history. So sometimes these traditions are picked up without them knowing the truth behind it, right? And so again, that's her assimilating and her like finding herself in this country that she was not born in, right? So these are questions you should ask yourself, like, how did my family assimilate? Especially people who left from a country, and it can also happen from a city to a different city, from a school to a different school, and this is more so like fits for people like the minority group. All right, aggressions are hostile or violent behavior or attitudes towards one another. Think about what you know about history. What are examples of aggression around the world to people in the US or to our community? So think about, as we're doing this lesson, like, how have you seen aggression play out throughout the experiences of these indigenous people and children? Okay, so what you're going to explore the mission system in California. And this is actually visiting the idea where people now in our time, they are starting to question the act of like having these statues that are the colonial statues. Like, for example, the priest, the Father Junipero Serra, his there was his in some missions, I guess they were graffitied. The sister at the mission of San Jose shared that their mission was their statue was graffitied and the mission was graffitied. So that is an act of protest, right? And people are upset about it. Like, why do we have to have these? Why do we have to have these statues that are the colonizers? Like, why do we have to have schools that are named that have these that has colonial history? So you're going to that's for you to decide. Like, where do we stand on that, right? And finally, focal period number 2 is the boarding schools. And the boarding schools were they were a tool to assimilate these kids that were, hardcore indigenous, obviously, because that's who they are, that's where they're born, they're here. But when the US decided to snatch the lands, the people were forced to change as well. And that meant our children, our kids, you guys, like kids your age, right? So you're going to take some notes here um, from these from these dates on your handout. So in 1893, there was a mandatory education for Native children became a federal policy. So they were forced to go to these schools. If not, families were punished in a sense that they were that they withheld their resources. In 1978, Indian Child Welfare Act passed. Native parents in the U.S. gained the legal right to keep their own children from these schools. So I believe that's when it stopped. I'll double check on that. Boarding school goals: leave behind tribe ways to learn English, assimilate to whiteness, and leave their home. So they were forced to be this idea of whiteness where they had to drop the accent, right? Where they have to look proper and prim, like the long hair. That was considered wild, and the word that they've used is savage, right? It was savage. Um, they had to dress, you know, as you can see here, they had to look with was American in quotations. And there was a term for it that I will post here in the comment of what they wanted to do with these kids, okay, and adults. The conditions in these boarding schools weren't great. There was a lot of disease and there's a lot of disobedience because, hey, when you don't like something, we rebel, right? So they were punished, they were dehumanized. It was horrible. All right. Then you're going to watch a documentary. It's a really good one. And again, it's not the best in terms of like, it's sad, right? So just be wary of that. And then focal pillar 3, this is talking about the perspective of what was happening in these boarding schools. And you're going to answer a few questions. Document G, you're going to analyze these pictures, and it's quite alarming when you really look at these. And you're going to do the same for document H, some letters of a father who was pleading the administration about their child's experience. And then when you're all done, you're going to do your reflection at the bottom of your notes. And then you're going to do your exit ticket. Okay? And then you're all done. If you have any questions, you can just holler at me in class and I will come to your help. Okay? And again, when you're doing this lesson, take your time. There's no need to rush. This is your pace. This is your pace. You have to remember that. Okay? And that is all. Okay? Bye.